Imagine a single decision powerful enough to set the entire Sahel on fire. One man, one name, surrounded by silence. Yet behind that silence, armies are repositioning, alliances are hardening, and France and NATO are playing a dangerous shadow game. The real question is not whether a coup was attempted, but why certain forces are desperate to protect the man accused of it. What happens if the truth fully comes out? And what happens if one border is crossed? This video exposes the hidden trap, the unseen hands, and the stakes no one wants you to understand. Once you hear this, you won't be able to look away. The confession was delivered in a locked room in Ouagadougou. A former military officer, hands bound, voice shaking, admitted on camera that he had taken money to kill Captain Ibrahim Traore. He named his handler. He described the plan in detail. And then he said the name that changed everything: Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. The man who had once ruled Burkina Faso, who had been ousted in a second coup just months after seizing power himself, was now accused of orchestrating an assassination plot from across the border. And that border, just a few hundred kilometers to the south, belonged to Togo. This is not a story about one failed coup. This is about what happens when a fugitive becomes a weapon, when silence becomes complicity, and when a small West African nation finds itself standing between a revolutionary government and the full weight of Western geopolitical interests. Burkina Faso did not arrive at this moment by accident. The country has been in a state of violent transformation since 2022, when frustration over jihadist insurgencies, French military presence, and government paralysis reached a breaking point. Damiba himself had led the first coup in January of that year, toppling the elected President Marc Christian Cabaret and promising security reforms. But his tenure was short-lived. By September, Captain Ibrahim Traore, a younger and more radical officer, seized power in a counter-coup, accusing Damiba of failing to protect the nation and maintaining too many ties to foreign interests, particularly France. Damiba fled. The official version said he went into exile. But exile in geopolitics is never neutral. Where you go, who shelters you, and what you do next are all signals. And Damiba went to Togo. Togo is a narrow sliver of a country wedged between Ghana and Benin, ruled for decades by the Nasingbe family. Nasingbe has been president since 2005, succeeding his father in a transition that many international observers considered dynastic and authoritarian. Togo maintains close ties with France, hosts French corporate interests, and has historically played the role of the compliant partner in a region where Paris has long considered itself the invisible hand. It is not a revolutionary government. It is not aligned with the new Sahel axis. And it is exactly the kind of place where a deposed leader with Western connections might find temporary refuge. But what Burkina Faso claims is that this refuge has turned into something far more dangerous, a staging ground. The Burkinabe government says it has evidence. Not rumors, not speculation, but confessions, financial records, and digital communications that tie Damiba to a coordinated effort to destabilize Traore's government. According to officials in Ouagadougou, the plot involved recruiting disaffected soldiers, channeling funds through intermediaries, and planning a violent strike aimed at eliminating Traore and reversing the revolution. The coup attempt failed. Several suspects were arrested, and, under interrogation, they pointed back to Damiba. Burkina Faso claims it has submitted formal extradition requests to Togo, complete with documentation. And Togo, they say, has done nothing. No response. No denial. No cooperation. Just silence. This is where the tension begins to build in ways that go far beyond two neighboring countries. Burkina Faso is not alone. It is part of the Alliance of Sahel States, a newly formed bloc that includes Mali and Niger, all three of which have undergone military coups in recent years, and all three of which have expelled French troops, rejected ECOWAS authority, and pivoted toward a more independent, often Russia-aligned foreign policy. The AES is not just a military alliance. It is a political statement. It represents a generation of Sahel leaders who believe that decades of French neo-colonial influence have failed their people, that Western-backed governance structures have been hollowed out by corruption and external control, and that sovereignty must be reclaimed by force if necessary. Traore is one of the most vocal and uncompromising leaders within this bloc. And the message from Ouagadougou is clear. If Togo will not hand over Damiba, then the AES will consider other options. But Togo is not acting alone, and this is where the geopolitical stakes escalate dramatically. According to the narrative coming from Burkinabe officials and AES-aligned media, France has quietly intervened behind the scenes, not with diplomacy, but with a warning. The claim is that Paris has invoked old defense agreements with Togo, agreements that date back to the independence era and grant France the right to intervene militarily if Togo's territorial integrity is threatened. And the message, according to this version of events, is blunt. If AES forces cross into Togo to capture Damiba, France will consider it an illegal invasion and will respond with force. This is not confirmed by official French government statements, but it fits a broader pattern. France has been systematically pushed out of the Sahel over the past 3 years, losing military bases, political influence, and economic leverage. Togo is one of the few remaining footholds. And Damiba, whether by design or circumstance, has become the trigger. What makes this situation so volatile is not just the presence of a fugitive or even the threat of military confrontation. It is the suspicion, widespread in Ouagadougou and across the ES, that this entire scenario has been engineered as a trap. The logic goes like this. Damiba is being sheltered deliberately, not because Togo has any particular loyalty to him, but because his presence serves a purpose. He is bait. The longer he remains free, the more Traore is pressured to act. And if Traore does act, if Burkinabe or AES forces move into Togo to arrest him, then France has the pretext it needs to intervene militarily, to frame the Sahel governments as aggressors, and to rally international support for what would effectively be a counter-revolutionary intervention. This is the nightmare scenario that Traore and his allies believe they are facing. A deliberate provocation designed to lure them into a conflict that they cannot win, not because of military weakness, but because the battlefield has been rigged in advance. Togo's silence in this context is not passive. It is strategic. Every day that passes without a response to the extradition request is another day of escalation. Another day in which Traore must choose between accepting impunity for a man accused of trying to kill him or taking action that could spiral into a regional war. And France, according to this reading, is watching closely, ready to respond the moment that line is crossed. The involvement of NATO, even indirectly, adds another layer. France is a NATO member. And while NATO has no official mandate in West Africa, the alliance's strategic interests are never far from French foreign policy, particularly in regions where security concerns, migration routes, and resource access overlap. If France frames an AES incursion into Togo as a threat to a partner state, it opens the door for broader Western involvement, whether through intelligence support, arms supplies, or even direct military presence under the guise of stabilization. This is not the first time the Sahel has been caught in this kind of geopolitical crossfire. The region has been a theater of proxy conflicts, covert operations, and shifting alliances for years. The jihadist insurgencies that plague Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are often presented in Western media as purely local or ideological phenomena, but many Sahel leaders argue that they have been fueled, prolonged, or even manipulated by external actors with interests in keeping the region unstable. France's military presence, framed as counterterrorism, has been reinterpreted by the new generation of leaders as occupation. And the narrative of Western intervention to protect democracy has been flipped from a Sahel perspective. Democracy failed because it was corrupted by foreign influence, and sovereignty can only be restored by breaking free of that influence, even if it means embracing authoritarianism in the short term. Traore is not a traditional diplomat. He is a military officer who came to power through force and who has built his legitimacy on the promise of protecting Burkina Faso from both jihadist violence and foreign manipulation. His speeches are blunt. He does not hide his contempt for France, for ECOWAS, or for any institution he sees as complicit in the neo-colonial order. And his base of support, both within the military and among the population, is built on that defiance. If he backs down now, if he allows Damiba to remain free and untouched, It undermines everything he has claimed to stand for. It sends a message that the revolution is incomplete, that external powers can still dictate outcomes, and that justice can be delayed indefinitely when it inconveniences the wrong people. But if he orders a cross-border operation to capture Damiba, he risks exactly the scenario that his enemies may be hoping for, a military confrontation that gives France the justification it needs to intervene and crush the Sahel movement before it can consolidate. This is the dilemma that defines the current standoff. And it is not a dilemma that can be solved through negotiation alone, because the underlying interests are fundamentally opposed. Burkina Faso and the AES want Damiba because his freedom represents a direct threat to their survival. Togo, whether willingly or under pressure, is sheltering him because his presence serves a larger strategic purpose. And France, lurking in the background, sees an opportunity to reassert influence in a region where it has been steadily losing ground. The question is not whether this tension will resolve peacefully. The question is who will blink first, and what the consequences will be when they do. There is also a broader question about legitimacy and international law. Burkina Faso insists it has followed the proper channels, submitting extradition requests and providing evidence. But international law is only as strong as the political will to enforce it, and in West Africa, that will is fractured. ECOWAS, the regional bloc that once played the role of mediator and enforcer, has been sidelined by the AES, which withdrew from the organization after accusing it of being a tool of French interests. Without ECOWAS, there is no neutral arbiter. Without a neutral arbiter, extradition becomes a matter of power, not principle. And power, in this case, is asymmetrical. Burkina Faso has a motivated military and popular support, but it does not have the international backing or the economic resources to sustain a prolonged conflict. France has both, and it has the institutional memory of decades of intervention in West Africa. Togo, caught in the middle, is playing a dangerous game, but it is not without leverage. It can delay, obfuscate, and rely on the fact that any AES military action will be portrayed internationally as aggression, regardless of the underlying justice of a claim. What happens next could redefine the region. If Traore holds back, the coup attempts may continue, funded and coordinated from across the border, slowly eroding his government from within. If he moves forward, he risks triggering the very intervention that the Sahel revolution has been trying to avoid. And if France intervenes, it could reignite a cycle of violence and instability that would dwarf the current insurgencies, turning the Sahel into a full-scale theater of great power competition, with local populations paying the price. This is not a hypothetical. It is the logic that has governed conflict in Africa for generations, and it is the logic that the AES is trying to break. But breaking it requires more than rhetoric. It requires the ability to impose costs on those who manipulate the system, and that is where the standoff over Damiba becomes a test case. There is also the domestic dimension. Inside Burkina Faso, Traore's government is watching popular sentiment closely. The revolution was fueled by anger at perceived betrayal, by the sense that previous leaders had sold out the nation's security and sovereignty for personal gain or foreign approval. Damiba represents that betrayal in its most literal form, a leader who promised change and then, according to the current narrative, tried to undo it through violence when he lost power. Allowing him to escape justice would be seen as weakness, as a return to the old patterns where elites faced no consequences for their actions. Traore cannot afford that perception. His legitimacy depends on being different, on being incorruptible, on being willing to fight battles that others avoided. But he also cannot afford to lead his country into a war it cannot win. This is the tightrope he is walking, and every day that Togo remains silent, the rope gets thinner. Regional powers are also watching. Nigeria, Ghana, Benin all have stakes in how this unfolds. A military confrontation between the AES and a French-backed Togo would destabilize the entire coastal corridor, disrupt trade routes, and potentially trigger a refugee crisis. It would also force other countries to choose sides in a conflict that many would prefer to avoid. Some governments in the region still maintain ties with France and see the AES as a destabilizing force. Others are quietly sympathetic to the Sahel movement, but are not ready to openly support it. The standoff over Damiba could force that choice, and the consequences of that choice will ripple across West Africa for years. There is also the question of what Damiba himself wants. Is he a willing participant in this standoff, or is he being used? Does he have political ambitions to return to power, or is he simply trying to survive? The answers are unclear, but they matter. If Damiba is actively coordinating coup attempts, then he is a direct threat, and capturing him is a matter of national security for Burkina Faso. If he is being used as a pawn by larger actors, then the real target is not him, but the system that is protecting him. Either way, his presence in Togo has become the focal point of a much larger conflict, and his fate is now tied to the survival of governments on both sides of the border. France's role in all of this cannot be understated. For decades, Paris has maintained a network of military bases, economic agreements, and political alliances across West Africa, a system that critics call Francafrique. That system has been under assault since the Sahel coups began, with French troops expelled, French companies losing contracts, and French political influence waning. Togo is one of the last remaining nodes in that network, and losing it would be a significant blow. From Paris's perspective, the Sahel movement is not just a regional phenomenon, but a direct challenge to French strategic interests, and it must be contained. Whether that containment happens through diplomacy, economic pressure, or military force is a tactical question, but the strategic goal is clear. The Damiba situation, whether intentionally engineered or simply exploited, fits perfectly into that strategy. It gives France a reason to stay involved, a justification for intervention, and a narrative that can be sold to international audiences. Is this a strategic move or the start of a larger shift? The answer may depend on how Traore responds. If he finds a way to neutralize the threat without triggering a wider war, it could strengthen the AES and demonstrate that the Sahel can defend itself without relying on external powers. If he is drawn into a confrontation that he cannot control, it could be the beginning of the end for the revolution. And if France intervenes, it could mark a return to the kind of overt military involvement in African affairs that many thought had been left in the past. The stakes are not just about one man or one country. They are about the future of sovereignty, the limits of foreign intervention, and the question of who gets to decide what happens in West Africa. The silence from Lomé continues. The pressure in Ouagadougou builds. And across the border, Damiba remains free, a fugitive, a symbol, and a trigger. Every intelligence report, every diplomatic cable, every military briefing is being watched for signs of what comes next. The Sahel has spent years trying to break free from the patterns that defined its past. This standoff will test whether that break is real, or whether the old powers still hold the keys. Traore knows what is at stake. His allies know. His enemies know. And somewhere in Togo, so does Damiba. The question is not whether this will end. The question is how much will have changed by the time it does. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.